Bittunes is about dealing with music piracy and dealing with music piracy with a carrot instead of a stick, because the whole file sharing thing went terribly, terribly wrong, and it shouldn't have, but it's one of the products of something being unrestricted. But file sharing basically should have and could have been brilliant. What's ended up coming out of the whole file sharing movement is BitTorrent finally sort of being unsuable and then ending up sponsoring music conferences in San Francisco. But it hasn't taken the whole file sharing phenomenon and done something in terms of the monetization that actually makes sense for the end user. It's imposing a way of distributing content from a centralized point, like World of Warcraft's latest, download for its users or whatever, distributing that to end users. But what about empowering end users? It's, to me, the whole idea of the file sharing phenomenon is about super distribution, which means end users having power rather than making them pay. So Bittunes is about monetization of digital exchange between peers, and you can't do that with traditional currencies. So it's been a plan that's been on the back burner for 5 or 6 years until there was a digital currency that had crossed the threshold of being able to be enough mainstream that it wasn't going to go away. It wasn't going to have a destiny like e-gold where it was going to get stamped out. So Bitcoin reached a point in April where it was clearly going to be around and it wasn't going to get killed. So, okay, then let's enact this obvious next step, which is doing a digital for digital exchange between files that are being shared and those sharing nodes that share that file getting reimbursed for the part of the file that they share. It's just the simplest, most obvious thing. After 5 or 6 years, after I first thought about it, still nobody's done it. So I guess, we finally realized we had to do it.
It sounds like Bittunes is there to help the unsigned or the independent artists only. But how are you going to actually prevent copyright infringement?
I mean, I really like the idea of pure P2P networks, but with Bittunes, it just does not suit being a pure P2P network where you could have every node uploading music, because inevitably people would just upload copyright music and you would end up with the same situation as LimeWire and what happened to all those ones, file sharing networks that got taken down by the record companies. So unfortunately, to make this work and to actually disrupt the music industry and fix it, you actually have to inject some sort of control. So we have a kind of gate or a filter mechanism at the front of Bittunes which says, do you really own the copyright of that track? Do you warrant that you own the copyright? And it's kind of an honor system, but the way to fix it, basically, if it turns out that somebody doesn't own the copyright, somebody else will complain, hey, that guy is not the owner of that. That's me. I'm the owner of that song. Well, then what we do is we just pull that song and you guys go and sort it out in the court or whatever and come back to us when you've sorted it out. Because we've now really understood we need a track image, the track, we need a description of the track, we need an artist image, we need a description of the artist, we need various other checkboxes clicked like I warrant that I own the copyright of this music, and then you agree to operate under the terms of Creative Commons license, but you enable Bittunes to trade commercially in your material. All of these things we've finally worked out there's a whole sequence that is the correct sequence that an artist needs to submit music to us, and that'll all be on the site next week where artists can upload. So everybody knows that the record companies have never given record contracts to like all the artists that have approached them, right? Whereas lots of other artists didn't quite fit the fashion of that year or didn't quite fit the label's image of what they exactly wanted, et cetera, right? That means there's always a thin slice that got the record contract right through the decades, through the 70s, through the 80s, through the 90s. Therefore, there's a whole lot of 70s music that has pretty much remained unheard. There's a whole lot of 80s music that has remained unpublished or unheard of, and same with 90s music. Now, I want all of those guys to come out of the woodwork, get their analog tapes, and digitize them and show us the tracks that the record company knocked back. And because a lot of that music is going to be great music. It didn't happen to fit into the record label's idea of what they wanted at the time, but I'm sure there's a brilliant music there. I know for a fact I've got many friends and that made brilliant music that didn't have a record contract, but it doesn't mean that people don't want to listen to that, you know.
Absolutely.
I like to think of it. Yeah, I like to think of this a bit like the 1960s. 1960s was like this explosion of music that came about because the record companies couldn't keep up with this massive just explosion of talent. So this incredible diversity of music came out. But by the 70s, we went into the disco era. Everything got kind of homogenized, and then went into the kind of rap era, and you got the record companies took control and started limiting what we were listening to. But in the 60s, they couldn't control. It just Hendrix just exploded, and Janis Joplin just exploded out of the scene. But I've sort of got a conviction that in the 80s, 70s and 80s and 90s and early 2000s, etc., there's a whole lot of music we haven't heard. Where is it? I want to hear it.
No, absolutely.
But the next part, I can presume the next part of your question is how are you as an artist going to be discovered, which is one of the great weaknesses of iTunes, because if you put your music into iTunes, you just get lost in the noise because iTunes has got this ecosystem dominated by the kind of middle level labels who need 20 albums worth of artist music before they can get into that tier. If you're just an independent artist and you put your music on iTunes, you're going to just disappear into the noise level. So a lot of the future of Bittunes and how we deal with that is we've got a patented recommendation technology, which is, again, a peer-to-peer system, which we haven't really talked about that much, but it's about discovery of content that's relevant for you as a person, what you like. You'll find automatically the content that people like you are liking. But this technology generally is called collaborative filtering. It's what Amazon does on the Amazon website, where they say, this book that you've just bought, would you like to see other books bought by people who've bought this book? That's collaborative filtering. But that happens on a server. So what this patent that we've developed is basically pushes all of that recommendation technology down to the client device level. So it's device-based recommendation technology where it's privacy protected and it doesn't hold that information about you and what you like on the server. It's all held on everyone's device. And that's the whole philosophy behind Bittunes, is pushing everything down to the device level and keeping it away from the server. Because ultimately people want control. And that's kind of the secret sauce that will really make Bittunes fly, is that after a while people will realize that they will discover amazing music on it because the Bittunes application will be kind of heuristic and intelligent and will learn what they like and will find things for them by the wisdom of the crowd and give those recommendations to them. And those recommendations will not be sitting on a server. They'll be between users. If that makes any sense.
No, it does make complete sense.
It's got to start somewhere, but if you've got to start with the independent scene and then gradually, which excludes all record company music, but then what happens when that scene grows and Bittunes starts to grow and you get more and more people buying it, it becomes a large economy and a large ecosystem. You're going to get bands that are signed to a record label who go, hey, wait a minute, if we release on Bittunes, we're going to make a lot more money than we're making at the moment through the label, because the label is taking 60% of our profits and they're making us repay the cost of the recording studio, whereas if we release our next album on Bittunes, we're going to get like 3 or 4 times the amount of money. So at that point, you're going to get bands firing their label and releasing the next album on Bittunes. So mainstream is going to start being independent. Because this word independent needs a brand rejuvenation. The whole idea of being independent is fantastic. Who wants to be dependent? Being independent shouldn't have to mean being poor. It could be being independent and being fabulous, like DubFX. He's an incredible example. This guy is completely independent and he does not need a record contract. So but the best thing about that, what DubFX can't do at the moment, he can go around the world and make a shitload of money doing what he does best, but does he have a system to let his fans make money by being his fans and actually distribute to each other and actually share in the wealth of what he's creating? No, he doesn't. That's what Bittunes is about. It's about artists who love their fans rewarding their fan base by incentivizing to be part of the enterprise that they're creating with their creative content.
Excellent. No, that's beautiful. Really good answer. And I do have an analogy, but I'm trying to really I have to be out of the house in 25 minutes and I still need to take a shower first.
Yeah. I'm going to have dinner too. It's like 8 p.m. here.
Last question. iTunes was mentioned. Google Play was mentioned. Are you developing for OS as well? Or is that something that is...
You know what? We would really love to, except that Apple is pulling every single Bitcoin application out of the iTunes App Store.
Yeah. So,
I mean, Apple is obviously wanting to do its own digital currency or is scared of Bitcoin or they're worried about the 400 million credit cards that are attached to 400 million plus credit cards that are attached to the iTunes Music Store and the App Store, and they don't want to get out of step with Visa and MasterCard, etc. So they just don't want to. They can't enable Bitcoin because it'll piss off too many of their valued partners. So I think Google is eating their lunch there, because basically what Apple won't do becomes a massive opportunity for Google. I mean, for instance, just myself, I was an iPhone user, an iOS developer, and reluctantly developing an Android because Android is the platform that's enabling us to work with Bitcoin. So we'd love to work with iOS and with Apple, but Apple doesn't want to play ball.
Cool. All right.
As simple as that. When they do, we'll make an Apple version.